Hey everybody, welcome to video number 22 in the UE5 Vehicle tutorial series. In this video and the following videos, I'll be showing you how to create this color picker widget and how to use it to change the color of your vehicle as part of a vehicle customization system that also is going to be saved to a save slot so that your players can customize their vehicles and have them saved. But for this video, all we're going to do is just create the color picker, because that alone is going to make for probably roughly about an hour-long video, which is very unfortunate. I'm trying not to make hour-long videos, but there is a lot to cover in the making of a color picker. I wish there were kind of a stock included way of doing this, but there isn't. So we're going to make one. Alternatively, if you don't want to spend an hour, watching me make this and learning how it's done, you can go to the marketplace and buy a plugin for $20, or you could join my Patreon page, download the project for $5, and just transfer the widget to your project. So, alright, if you're still watching this, then let's create the widget. The first thing you're going to need is a texture for the color wheel. Here's the one I have. I just went on Google, downloaded it. It's a high enough resolution where it's going to look good on the screen for the size I'm going to make it. And that's it. It's just a texture. Some content creators on YouTube will show you how to create a material using UV coordinates and sine waves to create that gradient in a material, and then they'll use it just as a texture just to display on the screen. So I won't do that. I'm actually going to advise you to just download the texture. Now, as you see here, I want to turn that color wheel into just a ring. So I have room in the middle here for a square for the saturation and value. And for that, we are going to need a material. Let's go back here into the content browser, right click your color wheel texture, and create a material. Set here in the output the material domain to be user interface. Set the blend mode to translucent. You could be using masked instead of translucent, but because UI doesn't have anti-aliasing, you are going to end up with pixelated edges, and it just looks bad. So I like to use opacity instead and create my own masks using a gradient. In this case, the radial gradient exponential is going to be our gradient of choice. Now UVs here, you don't have to plug anything into it. Center position by default is 0.5.5, which is the middle of your texture, which is perfect for a circle. Radius also is 0.5, which means the radius is the half the width of your texture. And density is the one we're interested in. So let's go ahead and right click, create a constant. You can see a density of 0 is completely translucent. Here's 1, 5, 10. I will make it pretty sharp. Previously what I had set was 100. So you can see the edge here isn't pixelated, but it's still pretty sharp. If you set it to 75 if you want, but I like 100. So with that material done, we're going to leave it like that just for now, just to kind of show you why I'm going to add a little to it to make it into a ring. Let's go back into our UI folder and let's create a new user interface widget blueprint based off of the user widget. Let's call it UMG underscore color wheel. Let us add a canvas panel to it. set the size here, instead of fill screen, we'll set it to custom. And I found that 300 by 300 is the perfect size for the menu I'm making. So let's go ahead and go with that. Then you are going to need an image that will take the entire canvas panel. This is going to be your background image, which is the material we just made for your color wheel. So select it from the content browser, select your image, and then into brush here, just click the arrow to select your material. Now back into our material. Some people would tell you to just leave it like that and have sliders on the side of it for saturation and value, and I just don't like that, so we're not going to do that. What we're going to do instead is we're going to have another gradient exponential, which we are going to subtract from the first one to create a circle in the middle here that won't have an opacity. So add a subtract node, and you can see it starting to take shape here. Let's again play with the radius, so another constant. Radius I have set previously to 0.4, and let's plug our density back into it, and now we have a nice ring. And so this is it for the color wheel material. That's all you needed. Next, we will need that image here to not be a variable, because we're not going to use it to change anything. It's really just a background picture. So we're going to right click the image here and wrap it with a button. Now by default the image is still selected when you do that, so let's go ahead and set it to fill up the button. Set all the paddings to 0. Also in the in the behavior visibility, you want to be sure to hit non-hit testable, so that you can't click the image because the button is underneath it and you really want to be clicking the button. Now onto the button. If you go here into appearance, you have more padding settings that you need to put to 0. And also color and opacity will affect your texture, so don't do that. Background color is the one that you need. Set the opacity all the way down to 0. And we will call this button underscore hue, just so you know what that button is doing. We do need it to be a variable, because we'll go down here into the events, and we'll use pressed and released, so the player can drag and drop to move a cursor to pick the hue of the color that they want. And let's click here on the button in the variable list to add the other one, so we don't have to go back into the designer. It's just quicker that way. And let's also create a Boolean variable for hue selection, which we're going to set to true when the button is pressed and false when the button is released. We are also going to create the cursor right away. The cursor is another image. We're going to drag and drop onto the canvas panel. That image should have a Z order of 1 to be sure it's always displayed on top of the color ring. Let's anchor it here into the center. Set its pivot to 0.5 and 0.5. Set its position to 0, 0. Size to, I think 25, 25 was the one I set. And actually the position, let's go ahead and position it onto the ring. Okay. Now also I want it to be see-through. I don't want it to just be a block like that. So in the Draw As section of your image, we'll select the rounded box. On the outline setting, we will be setting the translucency, or the alpha, sorry, to 1. And the color, let's make it a nice gray color that will contrast with the lighter colors on the wheel. And for the tint, which is the center section, we'll set it to 0. And I think I forgot to set the width here for the outline. Ah, that's better. So that will be a cursor that's going to move around with the mouse. Let us set up right away the render transform pivot, because the way we are going to move that on the rim is to just affect the angle value here. So we need the pivot to be set up properly. So let's set the angle to 180 degrees and just change the pivot until the cursor is in the right place. Okay. Now if you play with the angle again, you can see that your cursor is moving onto the rim perfectly. And that's what you want. And the reason I've set it to be on the right hand side here, when its angle is 0, is because that's what you need basically for it to be in sync with the color that's going to get picked. Because we're going to use HSV to RGB, HSV being hue, saturation, and value. And you'll understand more about that as we go. And lastly, what I'll do here is I'll add a little preview image, because I won't be showing you how to apply that color to the car in this video, because it's going to be pretty long already. So I'll split it in possibly 3 videos for the whole thing, including creating the menu for customization with a few animations and 3 different color slots for primary, secondary, paint, and the wheel color. So in this video here, I'll just set up a preview here. I'll anchor it at the bottom left. Oops. And I still want it to be sort of pretty. So I'll make it a rounded box. There you go. That's going to be your preview. I guess it could be bigger. Good. Also set it to be in your behavior, visibility, set it to be not hit testable, so that it doesn't interfere with the button for the color wheel. Let's give it a name, image preview. And let's get to work on getting the hue value from that ring here with the mouse. The best way to do that, well, I won't say the best way, but the best way I know how to do that will be to add a branch here on the event tick and use our Boolean value to determine whether or not the player has pressed the mouse button over the button for the hue. And if that's the case, then we want to get the mouse position on viewport. Because basically what we want to get is a relative location from the mouse cursor to the center of the color wheel image, so that we can calculate an angle that will be anything from 0 to 360 for the hue for the HSV to RGB. And so for that, we also need to get the hue button. I'll actually move that aside, because that graph is going to get pretty big, unfortunately, because there's no real easy way to do that. You know, you'd think you could just get a node like get pixel position or whatever, and it's just going to be always accurate. But it turns out there isn't such a node, And your game window could be full screen, it could be windowed. If it's in a window, the window can move around. The resolution scale will also affect the pixel position of things, and aspect ratio as well. You know, you anchor your color picker to the top right corner. Somebody playing with a wide monitor, the positions will be different. And so there's a whole complex system that I had to look up on Google. And it took me a couple hours to figure it out and get it working in every possible scenario. And I'll show you how to do that, so you're welcome. And the button Hue here, we want to get the cached geometry. And we want to local to viewport. Now in the coordinate here, we want the center of the image. But unlike a texture, you can't just put 0.5 and 0.5 here to point to the center. You have to give it the coordinates on the widget space, if you will. And so you want to get here the local size from the cached geometry. Get local size. And you want to get the half of that to get the coordinate to the center. So you want to divide it. Convert the B pin here to a float, so you can divide it by 2. And those are your local coordinate. The output of that is the viewport position, which also doesn't account for the viewport scale or the resolution scale. So we're going to create a multiply here, which we'll set again to a float, and we will grab the viewport scale, like so. Now you have the actual on-screen position of the center of that image. That was easy, right? I mean, it's obvious. Everybody should just know how to do that, right? It's just a couple nodes, one of which is called geometry for whatever reason, because we're not using any sort of geometry. We're using textures and 2D coordinates, so geometry makes a lot of sense in this use case. And then, yeah, we want the mouse position relative to the position of the center here. So we're also going to have to multiply this by the viewport resolution. So repeat the process here. The viewport scale. There you go. And we want to subtract the cursor location from the image center position. And there you go. Next thing, we want to break that vector so we can use the x and y values separately, because the way we're going to get the angle is to use an old call a tan 2 degrees. Oh, and that note, for some reason, just to mess with you if you're not careful, the x and y are inverted. So you have to cross your wires like that. I made that mistake when I made the widget first. It took me quite a bit of time to track it down, so don't be me. Be careful. Then we're going to map range that, clamped, because that node here will give you a value of 180 degrees to minus 180. And it's important to put this in this order, otherwise your color is going to be inverted. So when your mouse cursor is over the blue, your color is going to be orange. So you don't want that. So it's important to have the positive first and then the negative. And the output of that will be 0 to 360, because that is what you need in the hue. So the only thing left to do here is to promote this to a variable, and we'll call it hue, quite simply. And now that we have that, we want to set the rotation on our little cursor, which I'm pretty sure I forgot to make a variable out of it. Nope, actually I just forgot to give it a name that makes sense, which is why I'm not finding it. So we'll call it cursor hue. That's better. And we will set its transform make widget transform. We're going to leave everything empty except for the angle here. And for the angle, instead of just, dragging it from here, I will make it kind of a separate thing, because we'll be collapsing it into a function that we can use in different places in the graph. Because we're going to be setting the cursor position when we create the widget, because we want to be able to give it an input color. And I'll explain a little bit more on that later. So right now what you want to do is you want to get the hue variable, and you want to do the opposite of that. So now the hue variable goes from 0 to 360, and you want to remap that back to 180 to minus 180. Again, very important not to get these backward. So positive first and negative second. And that will get collapsed into a function, which we're going to call set hue cursor. Let's test it right away. Make sure I didn't make any mistake, like not adding it to the actual main menu widget. Content browser, UI folder, that is the UMG color wheel. Let's size it to content. Nope. Set it to 300 and 300. Yes. Now you can fix that pretty easily. Let's go back into our UMG color wheel, into the designer. Select your canvas panel, right click and hit wrap with size box. In the size box you can override the width and height and set them both respectively to 300. You can compile and save that again. If you go here, set the size of it, you can just hit size to content and it'll be the appropriate size. So that Z order is 1. We'll set the Z order to 2 so it's in front of the render target. So we can click it, anchor it to the top right, set the alignment here to 1. Okay. And it works. Now you can see the cursor is following the mouse smoothly and everything, and it looks great. So let's use that preview here to make sure the hue is set correctly and I didn't mess up any of the map ranges. Let's grab here our image preview. Set color and opacity. Alright, HSV to RGB. And we'll plug the hue in here. And set everything else for now to 1, 1, and 1. We are also going to collapse this into a function. And we'll call it set output color. And now you can see I got it right. The output color is the one I'm selecting here onto the color wheel. Roughly. It could be a little more accurate, but that's alright. And that leaves us with the next step, which is to create the square for the saturation and value. For that, we are going to need a material. Material. Let's call it M gradient SV for saturation and value. Let's also set it to material domain user interface. And for this, we'll be using ramps. So in the ramp, you have left to right and top to bottom. We'll be using both. So you can see here, ramp, left, right, and top to bottom. We'll just plug these into the final color here. We'll create constants. One and 0. You can see we have a gradient. It looks pretty weak. I mean, there's almost no black in it. So let's add a power node so that it looks more accurate to what the gradient is actually going to look like in the HSV output. So that's for your top to bottom. We actually need 2 of these. Let's copy and paste it. The second one is going to be our color. So let's create a constant 3 vector. And immediately before I forget about it, right click it and convert it to a parameter, which I will call color, because that makes sense and it's easy to remember. And we will plug that color instead of the one here, so it's at the top. Now let's give it an actual color so that we can see it. Now as you can see, there you go. We're also going to try here the ramp. Well, actually, we don't need to try anything, we'll just plug it as it has to be. And so now what you want is to have the black and white ramp on the left and the color and black ramp on the right. And that's why we're going to use the ramp left, right. So black and white onto the left, the A, color and black to the right into the B. And now you have your image here representing the saturation on the horizontal, the x-axis, and the value on the vertical or y-axis here. And I suppose you could have used a texture for that somehow, but you want that color here to change to represent the color you've selected on the color wheel for the hue, just so it looks better. And so I decided to make it a material here. Now let's add another image. I will center that one. And the size I set, I believe, was 160. Yeah, that looks right. Okay, 160 works. Also, that image is getting wrapped into a button as well. Same as the Hue wheel. And again, let's repeat the process of making sure it is using the button completely. And behavior visibility, no hit test, so it doesn't interfere with the button. Button appearance, paddings 0, 0. Let's call the button again. How about button SV? And then the image, we need a reference to that because we're going to change the color in the graph. So it needs to be a variable, and it needs to have a name that I'll remember, so image SV is gonna work for me. And we need a cursor as well for that one. Oh, actually, what we need the most is to put our material on there. Content browser, make sure your material is selected, and use here in the appearance brush the little arrow. There you go. For the cursor, we are simply going to copy and paste or duplicate this one and name it cursor SV. This one's set to the middle. Set the position to 0, 0. Since we made it a duplicate and the other one had the pivot here, let's put the pivot back to 0.5 and 0.5 for this, just to make sure we don't cause issues later down the line. Also, that button here for the saturation and value should be in front of the color wheel. So the Z order of the color wheel was 0, so we'll set it to 1. And then we'll set the cursor SV to Z order 2. Alright, it looks as it should. Now what we need to do here is to update the color depending on the hue we selected. So that'll be image SV, get dynamic material, set vector parameter value, and the name I gave it was color. Now for the value, we will make another HSV to RGB. We'll leave everything to 1 except for the hue, which will be our hue float variable. And we'll also collapse that as a function, because we'll be using it in different places. We'll call it set image hue, I guess. Now you can see that this is working. Your little square here in the middle is changing color, as it should. So what's left to do now is just to make sure you can drag the mouse onto that square and change the saturation and value. And the way we do this is going to be very similar to the way we've done it for the hue color wheel. And that will be to grab our button, so button SV, and create 2 events, unpressed and unreleased. Create a new bool variable, which we're going to call SV Selection, just to be consistent with the previous one we made. And we'll set it to true and false, like we did previously. Cool. Let's add another branch here using our new SV selection boolean. Now this one is going to be a bit different because it's a square and we're not going to be using the middle of it for the coordinates, because we're not looking for an angle, more like a 0 to 1 variable depending on how far from the coordinate or the top left corner you are. And so we will get our image preview, or actually we'll get the button, just to be consistent with the other one. Both of them are going to work, but let's go with the button. So get cached geometry. Again, local to viewport. As I mentioned, we'll leave the local coordinate to 0, 0, which is your top left corner. We will multiply the viewport position by the viewport scale again. Let's make some room here. We are also again going to get the mouse position and viewport. And as I mentioned earlier, get mouse position, you have two options here, platform and viewport. But viewport is the one I like to use in this case, because that's the one I find to work the best. Because platform will give you different results depending on the amount of monitors you have. For example, I have 2. And so the platform position and the viewport position are going to be different. And they don't make sense actually. Because my second monitor is onto the left, and Windows knows that. But somehow the game assigns it coordinates as if it was on the right of the first one. And it just, I don't know, it's really unpredictable. You can't really comprehend what's happening. So I won't be using that. I like to use the viewport instead, which again needs to be multiplied by the viewport scale. And same as before, we will have to subtract the cursor position to get the relative position with the image. And we will need to break that so we can use X and Y separately. So split struct bin. And now we're going to have 2 map ranges to create values from 0 to 1 from the size of the button, which we know is 160. So we want to remap the value here. So map range clamped. So we know the output should be 0 to 1, and we'll just pretend we don't know that the button is 160 pixel wide, because you might want to be able to rescale that widget eventually. And so you want that to be dynamic. And so here from the cache geometry, we will get the local size, which is exactly what I did up top here. But I already forgot if I explained why I did that instead of just putting the number in there. So that's why. Also, we need to multiply that. So tedious. Okay, and with that, we have values here that we can use for the map ranges. And this one here is our saturation, because it's the x-axis, the horizontal. So we'll promote that to a variable, which we're going to call saturation. Then next for the y-axis, pretty much the same thing, but we are going to invert it because we want the value to be 1 when the distance here from the top left is 0, and 0 when the distance is 1. I suppose we could have set the local coordinates here to be from the bottom left, but you know, it's no trouble to just here reverse the output and set them to 1 and 0 so that we get the proper value. Again, drag off of here, promote to variable, and this one is value. And just like that, we now have an HSV values that we can use and convert to a color. And let's do that right away in the set image hue. No, actually, the image hue being the square texture, we only want to use the hue. That is correct. We need to set the output color, actually, to be using all of those new variables. Saturation and value. Now, I'm not going to make a slider for the alpha, because I don't think any of you are going to make translucent cars, so you're not going to be needing a translucent car paint material. Or at least if you do, please show me, because that's probably going to be epic. Okay, now we can close all of that. And let's test it immediately to make sure I haven't made a mistake. And I have. Oh yes, of course I have. I'm not updating anything after I'm moving this. Phew. So set hue cursor, no. Set output color, yes. I got scared here for a second. Alright, now you can see you can adjust the value on the y-axis and the saturation on the x-axis. And we just need to move the cursor to show that. Now to move the cursor, let's grab here the cursor SV, set translation, or set transform, sorry. And for this one, let me just pull up the image here, because it's quite complex, so I've taken screenshots of the previous widget I made. And again, let's collapse it to a function right away so we can kind of separate it from the graph so we can use it in different places. So collapse to functions. This one will be set HV cursor. Okay, and the way we are going to set it is to grab our button SV and repeat most of the process to get the cache geometry and blah blah blah. So feel free to copy and paste at this point if you want. Alright, now I've set the pivot of the image to be centered, and I'll also set the starting position of the cursor here to the center, because if you ever want to scale this widget, this will make it easier to have everything kind of anchored onto the center. And because of that, we need to complicate this a little bit by, again, comparing the cursor position to the center of the image instead of the top left corner. And this is why I am dividing by 2 the size of the widget. And also because of that, we need a positive half of the size and a negative half of the size. So let's multiply this by -1. And split it. There you go. And I will need more map ranges. We'll start with the saturation. Doesn't matter actually which one you start with, but we need to start with 1. So saturation will work. So X and X here, 0 to 1. So we know the saturation is going to be a value of 0 to 1, and we want to remap it back to the size of our image here from its center. And that's how you do that. So that's going to be your X. Let's copy and paste it here for the Y. And if you remember properly, for the Y you have to invert it. So you're going to put your negative first. And put the value into the value. This is so confusing. I kind of wish they didn't call it value, you know, HSV. So, and then plug that here into the transform. Actually, we need to split here the translation. Now you can see everything is correct. The cursor is following the mouse. You can tell by the preview color here that everything is lined up properly. And now I'm gonna say this now, although you won't need to know that until the next video. Leave the preview image here, even if you don't want to display it. Leave it there and set it to be hidden, because in the main menu widget we will create an event binding to that preview image changing color, so that the menu itself will handle what to do when you change the color and not the color picker, because that color picker is going to be used in different places in your project or different project, so you don't want it to take any decision other than set the color, and then you let the menu decide what to do with that color. And so that preview image is important. Even if you don't want to see it, it needs to be there. So now we have our color just like we need it to be. And the last thing we're going to do, I think, is to set it to a variable so we can output it, just in case we need to. Now the best place to do that, I guess we're going to have to do it here in both of the setups. So we'll create a function after we created a variable for the output color. Now the output color is going to be of type linear color. So we'll set the output color again from an HSV to RGB, and we'll plug our hue, saturation, and value into it. Collapse that again to a function. Let's call it set output color. Oh, I've already used that. Oh, you know what? Yeah, let's put that in the same place. I guess that's what's gonna make the most sense. Set output color here. Sorry about that, I'm still improvising a little bit. Although I've done it twice now. Every time I redo it, I find a better way to do it, so I'm still kind of improvising. So we're not gonna need that new function. And the output color here is already connected everywhere we need it to happen, so we're done here with the set output color. Good. Now the next thing to do, the last thing to do actually, thankfully, is to set an input color. Because let's say for example you select the car, by default the car is red, you bring up the color picker, you want the color picker to reflect the color the car is already selected, basically. And so we'll create another linear color variable, which we will call input color. This one will be instance editable, exposed on spawn as well. We'll compile and save just so we can give it a default value. Alpha should be 1, although we're not using the alpha pin anywhere, so that won't affect anything. We're still going to select the color here. Something like this. And onto the event construct. You want to get your input color. You want to convert it to HSV. RGB to HSV. And you want to set our HSV variables accordingly. And after you've done that, you need to update the display. So set hue, set output, set image. And now you need to add a delay here. Not a big delay or anything, just any delay really. So I'll set it, to default 0.2 seconds. And the reason you do that is because I found out here in this set hue color. No, actually, it wasn't in the hue color, it was on the cursor. Am I actually set HV? Yep, I was gonna forget to add it. And the reason for that is the HV cursor is using here the size of the button. And if you don't add the delay, the size here is going to output 0, and your cursor is always going to be in the center for some strange reason. I don't quite understand why it does that. Maybe that node here takes a little too long to execute and return a value, and so it just inputs 0. But yeah, adding a delay here fixes that. Although I don't like to add delays in random places, it's just kind of a hack, but it's a color picker, it's not like a game breaker. And now you can see our hue cursor is positioned properly to the input color that we've set, as well as the cursor here for the saturation and value. And this is it for this video. Finally, whew, I don't know if it was an hour, but it must be pretty close to it. I promise I'll make an effort next videos to make them shorter, because nobody, including myself, wants to sit through an hour-long video, but there wasn't anywhere in there that it would have made sense to kind of cut the video and make 2 videos out of it. So If you're hearing this, that means you made it to the end, so thank you very much for watching this, and I will see you very soon in the next video.